Thank you so much, Quorum, for hosting us. And thanks, Neha, for recommending that I have this conversation with you, because this is one of the subjects I can keep on talking, but I'll allow you enough opportunity to speak yourself. Yeah. But first things first, I would like all the children to come to the front row. Come on, come on. Come. Yeah, please do. Yeah. I think it's more motivating for us if all of you are in the front rows. So, Neha, I'm going to ask you one simple question, right? Why are we making such a fuss about nature and wildlife, from the tiny insects to the big elephants and the blue whales, right? There's so many of them. Why are we so fussed about them? But I want you to answer that question twice. One, I want you to address a 7-year-old, that explain as if you are talking to a 7-year-old, and then repeat that answer in a different way if you were talking to a 50 or a 60 or a 70-year-old oligarch or a politician who controls so much have so much control over our lives and existence, right? So that becomes slightly political slash activist. But most importantly, let's talk to the children first. Why so much fuss about nature?
Thank you so much for that wonderful question. So, for the kids, let's go back to when my mother was a kid growing up in Delhi, in North Delhi. She used to swim in the river Yamuna. She used to hear jackals outside her house. There was an occasional bear that would come near her house. There would be an occasional leopard that would come near her house. And she would describe the scenes to me, that at night I hear jackals laughing, because when jackals call, they sound like they're laughing. She would describe seeing a sloth bear near her house one time. There were all these monkeys and langurs, and her life was full of interesting sounds and sights and smells. And when I was growing up in Delhi, I didn't see the jackals. I heard them sometimes, but I could never think of swimming in the river Yamuna. I could never think of seeing a sloth bear or seeing a wolf, it was once in Delhi as well, or seeing lions, which, few generations before us have seen. I think life became progressively more and more boring as I grew older. And that's also because the number of animals and the number of variety of things had stopped. And the city became about its buildings and malls and construction, but never about Yamuna, the river, which had fish and young girls swimming in it. Never about the jackals, or never about the bears or the wolves. So my answer to the kids is, I think life would be boring without animals. Life would be boring if there wasn't a variety of things for us to see and experience. And the answer for the oligarchs, I think we would be more poor if we have less nature. I've just returned from Sundarbans, which is the world's largest delta. And you have these mangrove trees that grow there in the saline water. And the roots of the trees are like knives. They come out of the soil. And only the mangrove tree can grow in that place, which is full of storms and cyclones, and the water is not sweet, it's saline. And there's so many cyclones coming. The entire place is always in a state of waiting for cyclones. So when I was there, Cyclone Mocha was coming. Before that, Ayla came and Amphan came, and every year there's a cyclone. And as we are losing nature, the loss and damage is much more for us. So there was a super cyclone in Orissa in 99, and after that, Orissa started growing mangroves. And so when the next cyclone came, they were better prepared, because nothing but nature can save us from climate change. And climate resilience is actually an economic answer to much of our perils, because we cannot do anything at the scale that nature can. We cannot substitute a mangrove forest with any other technology that can save us from the might and the wrath of nature right now.
And what will happen if tomorrow morning we wake up and there's not a single bird on the planet?
Well, there will be no food for us, for one, because birds pollinate plants and birds help crops grow. And birds also control pests that destroy our crops. So the simple answer is there would be no food. And in fact, in a part of China where there are no sparrows left or no small birds left, people are actually hand pollinating the plants by taking a brush and dipping it in pollen and hand pollinating the flower. But can we do that? Like, can we do that for the billions and trillions of flowers and crops that we have on Earth? We just can't. The scale that nature gives us, the scale of pollination, which is the birds, the bees, and even the bats that pollinate, we cannot substitute it. So if we didn't have birds, not only would it be boring, there would be no food. How long can we live on eating, say, just fish, which is not a pollinated crop? We also need vegetables, we also need fruits, and wheat and rice.
So the other day, I got into a kind of a little argument with my best friend from school. He's not my best friend now, but he's still a good friend. I made other best friends after that. So, and he's heading research in one of the equity research in one of the big banks and everything. And he was asking me, he's based in Bombay. He had come to North India. He took some tips from me where all this development happening. He wanted to see and do a little recce. And then I was telling him, and he went towards the UP side, and he said, like, what swanky highways are coming up? It's looking so much development happening. I said, but do you realize how much of the ecosystem those highways have kind of consumed? How many ancient trees have gone away? How many insects have been kind of eliminated? He says, what's insects got to do with it? And he was like literally scoffing at me that how do insects matter? And I think there's more and more studies coming up about how we are depleting the insect population, and that's how it's going to have a huge impact on our existence.
So our food also depends on the humble earthworm that turns the soil and makes it rich enough to grow crops. So the soil is a living organism only because it has living things in it. And most of those living things are microbes and insects. So if you don't have insects, the soil is a dead thing. You need fungus, you need microbes, and you need insects. So worms are actually so treasured by farmers. And vermicompost that is made is like this black gold that they call it. So the humble insect again is responsible for our food. I think we make the mistake of thinking that we're not part of nature, but if you think about it, your potatoes come from dirt, your milk comes from a cow's stomach, a lot of our food comes from nature. We are still not consuming lab-grown things at scale. We are still consuming things that come from the dirt and from the stomach of an animal. So we are actually very much part of nature. And talking about highways, so there is this girl here, female elephant. This is Ganga elephant, and that's her calf. And you have to read the book to find out what happens to her when a railway line comes to her herd. But just to say that roads and highways and railways are needed for a country's progress, but they kill animals all the time. Therefore, we need to build flyovers, we need to build underpasses for the wildlife. We can't just keep building trains and bullet trains and highways as if there are no animals there. There are always animals there. And in some places, we have great interventions of building maybe a flyover for the cars and an underpass for the animals, or vice versa. And it's actually working where the animals are using that and the cars are using a different lane. It costs more money, but if it is to safeguard our tigers and elephants and gores, it's definitely worth it.
How many of us in this room have pets at home? Raise your hand, just raise it fully. And how many of you, keep it raised, and me too. And and how many of us have a very intimate relationship with our pets? Right? And do you know where our pets come from? They come from the natural world, right? So how many of us have a very conscious, intimate relationship with our natural world? How many of you really very consciously, are aware of what's happening around us with the birds and the bees and the animals? Not just, okay, there's a certain movement to protect street dogs and street cats, but there's like so much more to nature, right? How many of us consciously wake up in the morning and think of of nature at large as much as we think about our pets? So one of you wants to share a story with us. What kind of a relationship you have with nature? Any volunteers here? Yeah.
This is a story I'm an environmentalist. My cause is actually air pollution. And I've lost that battle. So I'm the one who did the first odd even in Delhi in 2015. Um, moving to plan B, I've started buying out lands in the buffer zone of tiger reserves. Okay, I'm the chowkidar. And I think I'm the first person in India who surveyed a 900 square kilometer tiger reserve to map out all the rare and endangered trees in that forest. And it's probably the only ecological restoration project of its kind, and it's only 4 hours away. So this is a story of hope, and hopefully more people will step up and do this, because I'm on such a natural high, and I have 3 leopards that visit my water hole. I have a whole herd of elephants that come every day. We have camera traps, we have drones, we measure all the ecological succession. I don't think I'm ever going to die. I'm so excited about what's going to happen the next day and the next day and the next day. So I've biohacked my way through nature.
That's a good word, biohacked.
Yeah, that's a good
Thank
one,
you.
actually. Yeah. So, Neha, before we continue, since we're talking about wildlife and being out there in the wild, tell us some anecdotes and stories of your time with the wild, and stories that you can't help repeating. And and some of your friends would have come up and said, Neha, we've heard this before.
It's interesting because India has so much wildlife. It's also interesting to be a woman working in wildlife because it's still a male-dominated field. So actually, let me talk about another woman, and then I'll talk about my story. So in this presentation, there's also a woman holding a snake. So that remarkable woman is Manjeet Kaur, who rescues snakes in Raipur, in Chhattisgarh, an extremely difficult place to work in. And every time the phone rings for her snake helpline, people ask for a man to help. And she says, I am the one who's going to catch the snake and rescue it, and they never believe her. So this is what she says, okay? No snake can take photos with its eyes. I tell people there are no CCTVs in the cobra's head. Listening to her matter-of-fact, business-like tone is the perfect antidote to venomous stories. Manjeet is completely matter-of-fact. People ask, will the snake husband or the snake wife come to bite me? Where is the Nagmani in the snake? The Nagmani is another crazy story that sounds better in movies than in real life. The story goes that cobras or king cobras have a brilliant, magical, all-powerful jewel in their heads. This is the Nagmani, which can cure diseases, bring fabulous riches, and is as desirable as the elixir of youth. So basically, Manjeet is going around rescuing the snake, saving its life, but also telling people that there is no Nagmani in a cobra's head, that rat snakes don't take photos with their eyes. These are all the mythologies that are around snakes, which can be dispelled by good science communication. But one of the stories I love to tell is how I walked into various animals all over India and nothing happened to me. And there is this perception that janwar jungli hai, it's going to harm you, right? That if you walk into a tiger, you're not going to come back. If you walk into a cobra, it's going to bite you. If you walk into a rhino, you're going to die. And it's Jim Corbett who first said that the tiger is a gentleman, and I completely agree. Because they're so discreet and they're so well-mannered in the way that they really don't want anything to do with us. So I walked into tigers during my field research, into elephants, obviously, as most of us have, rhinos, cobras. And honestly, all you need to do is respect their space. So all my friends have heard stories of walking into various animals, and I always tell them, honestly, the city is much more scary. Because you never know what happens in the city. But in the forest, if you keep boundaries, if you keep some distance away, you'll be fine. Yeah.
So at what stage of your life did you realize that you're really a nature lover and nature carer at heart and decided to make it your profession?
I always loved animals. I always knew it had to be part of my life, but I was actually a journalist first with the Indian Express because I also wanted to figure out how the world works. So I wanted to go into conservation after having learned a little bit of, just the way the system works in India and, how I can be informed more about the wider world. And I think conservation is not an obvious career choice for many people. But things have really changed in the last few years. In fact, I would encourage people to join conservation. There are so many more options now. You can even enter conservation from the business side of things, sustainability side of things, and obviously from the communication side or from the sociology side if you're working with communities. So it's much more organized and formalized now than it was when I first came in. And I think it's a great career option for people.
And considering how much love and care you have for the natural world, and when you see the degradation that's happening in front of our eyes, do you get anxiety pangs?
Yes, I do. And part of being an environmentalist is managing that trauma. And I think so many of us burn out because of that, because it is really distressing to see a place that you love or an animal or an individual animal you love dying. But I think caring also makes us human. And I don't think I ever want to be the kind of person who doesn't care. So I would rather care and feel bad than to just be like, oh, it's just another job. And I'd like to share something with you on dolphins. So the dolphin is our national aquatic animal. And the interesting thing about river dolphins that are in the Ganga and other rivers is that you don't really see them. And they're so shy, even when you see them for like a split second. They're also blind. So they use echolocation to find each other. And as the number of ships increase in the river, the dolphins are going silent because it's too noisy for them. And I think this is not something that people know about. And I feel passionately about those animals that people don't know about, or animals that are either secretive or cryptic, because I feel they are going to go first. I think the tigers and the leopards and the elephants are still out there. They're very big, they're large, they're visible, people know about them. But I think it's the ones that are secretive, like the dolphins, that might, go first. So this is a little portion on a bubble in a water. We know bubbles to be dreamlike. It's a quivering alchemy of soap and water. Bubbles exist between being and not being, and they carry rainbows on their body. Their falling apart seems to be natural to their temporary ephemeral existence. But the demise of a bubble is a loud pop that the dolphins can hear. Moving ships and boats create bubbles, and bubbles cause pops. And when they burst, the sound is a loud pop that is deafening the dolphins. So what's happening under the water is that sound is really amplified under the water. And for an animal that exists just through hearing, it's getting really loud for dolphins and whales and a lot of other underwater mammals. And for me, I think it's my job to make that known to everybody so that maybe we can change the hulls of boats so that it's less noisy underwater. Maybe we can zone rivers so that we don't go there while they are breeding in the breeding season. And just to consider that there's a dolphin in the river, that the river is not just for boats, but it's also for dolphins. That the forest is not just for highways, but also for elephants. I think for me, a lot more positive action can happen, but the first step is getting to know that this is a problem. Yeah.
So, whenever we talk about conservation, environment, climate change, it's always gloom and doom, right? So, what's the happy outlook?
This is not a gloomy book. I think it's a mixed bag, a little gloomy, a little hopeful. I'm very hopeful because I think people are more interested in nature than ever before. I think even, especially during COVID, like I had so many people tweeting to me saying, what's this bird? what's this animal? People were like, there's a dinosaur. I saw a dinosaur. Basically, they saw a monitor lizard, a large lizard, and it's not a dinosaur. But I think people are more interested than ever before. And also people are experiencing climate change. People do realize that there's something wrong with the environment and maybe we should do something about it. So I'm actually I'm more hopeful than I ever was. I think every year people are getting more involved. There's such huge bird watching communities in Delhi, rock climbing communities, people who go just for tree walks and people who just go to see reptiles. You know, there are these huge communities coming up. Citizen science is a huge thing now in India. And young people are getting involved more and more. That's my biggest hope.
And there's this growing movement which has been there for a few decades now, but I think it's kind of increasing now, and we see in India also we see a lot of activism through PILs and other means, which is recognizing the rights of nature. And I think the basic premise from my understanding is that rivers, mountains, trees, all animals, they're all to be treated as sentient beings, and they have as much rights on this planet as human beings. And there's this huge lobby out there that's fighting for their cause. The silent victims have some human beings who are speaking up for them, right? So what is your take on this whole rights of nature activism that's happening, and where do you stand on that?
So there are many countries in the world that have already given rights to nature. For example, New Zealand has given rights to a river. Ecuador gives rights to nature. Argentina gives rights to certain animals to be enjoying human rights. But I think the issue with this is that whenever you're representing something that can't speak for itself, you usually have it delegated to someone else. So like, for example, if it's a child, if it's an idol in a temple, even an idol in a temple is a legal entity, or a corporation is a legal entity. So you are actually delegating that voice to somebody else. That other person has to be competent to raise that issue. And I think that's where the problem comes. So if the person speaking for the Ganga, for example, is just another government officer or just another vested person, then there'll be no change, right? Because somebody has to represent the Ganga. And of course, there was a judgment of the Uttarakhand High Court that Ganga is a living person, or a living, maybe a female. But I don't think we need to go that far. I think for every decision to do with the Ganga, you need to have an ecologist or an environmentalist there to say, this is what we need, this is the minimum water we need in the river. There are dolphins, there are fish, there are turtles, there are cranes. It's not a dead thing that's just taking water. And the more wildlife you have, the better the health of the river. The more wildlife you have in your garden, the better your garden will be, the richer your soil will be. You can't substitute that with chemicals. So I think representation is the most important thing. That could be done through rights of nature. It could even be done without rights of nature, as long as there's someone competent to represent that mountain. And there's this beautiful movement in Gurgaon on Aravali, saving the Aravalis. And there's Aravali Bachao, and a lot of citizens are involved in that. They take out time from their daily lives to fight for the Aravalis almost as if it's a living organism.
I think today itself, I think in the Indian Express, there was an article or one of the newspapers today or yesterday about how so many hillocks in the Aravalis have been flattened, and Delhi and Gurgaon should brace itself for sandstorms coming in from Rajasthan side.
Yeah, Aravalis is a buffer and a shield from all the Lu wind that comes from Thar Desert. And obviously mountains have always protected the places beyond the mountains, but Aravalis are also the oldest mountains on earth. So it's not just any random rock that you're destroying, but Aravalis is full of illegal mining, and the people of Haryana have really shown their commitment. Like I said, it's a difficult fight. To fight illegal mining, it's not a joke. But they keep making teams, they keep going, and they keep, talking to the press, talking to the government, the municipal corporation. They're doing a great job.
At another level, I think we all know what's the right thing to do. individuals, NGOs, even many government organizations. You have got these global conferences happening, COP21, COP22, all these happening. So we know what's right and what's wrong, right? For example, there's this huge lawn culture in the US, but everybody, it's been documented enough that those lawns are full of chemicals, and those chemicals are actually causing the cancers within us, right? So we know it all, and it's also being talked about, right? But net, we still continue going down the wrong path. Why are we being so stupid and myopic?
I think we like shiny things that look foreign and, glittering. But I think our moms were right. Like our mom always said, no, to eat simple food, to keep it really basic and simple. That's actually the correct thing. So even, when you're making a lawn, grow native plants. You don't have to grow some plant that's come from Mexico. In fact, a Mexican tree, the Vilayati kikar, has destroyed the ridge forest of Delhi because it's an invasive species that doesn't let any other plant grow. And that's why there's so many monkeys out on the roads, because they don't have enough to eat inside the forest, even though we have a large part of forest that's protected. So, actually, mom was right. So eat your local khana, grow your local plants, know your local vanaspati, and you'll be fine, And all the seasonal things of drinking aam panna when it's hot and having dates in the winter, all of that was so connected to our food. We can actually change the world by changing our plate. We work a lot on food and the footprint of food. And if you say no to food that's imported, you might be able to change a lot of things. If you say yes to local fruit and vegetable and meat and fish that's Indian and not from Amazon, not Amazonian beef or caviar that's imported, you are significantly decarbonizing your life.
Yeah, so I think what we missed today are kitchen gardens. I think I grew up in government housing because my dad was in the government, and when he reached a certain level, we had houses in central Delhi with kitchen gardens, and every morning we would actually go and dig out potatoes, and even the bhuttas would come from there, and lauki, which I never ate, but we had so much lauki happening in our kitchen gardens, and I believe even in the concrete world that we are living in, there are people who are doing kitchen gardening on the terraces, right?
Bombay does this even better than Delhi. Bombay has even less space, and they grow beautiful vertical gardens, and they grow plants and vegetables. They also rear butterflies on their verandas, and you can do it. You just need to talk to a few experts. It's very easily doable. And yes, it creates a relationship with the food. Like, I just grew a tomato, just one, and I felt so good about it.
So, talking about wildlife and conservation, I think the most omnipresent, famous logo is Save the Tiger, right? But it can also be symbolic for lots more. But we really kind of get things, okay, save the tiger, save the tiger. But what I see is that all of us in this room, or most of us in this room, really don't know, okay, we care, we want to care. How do we contribute? How do citizens start contributing so it becomes a citizen movement, and 50 of us in this room start, and it becomes 500 and 5,000 and 500 million, right? And then when the pressure comes from the citizens level, and then you got activists and NGOs and other people who are doing it in a structured way, maybe that will move the needle.
I mean, there's no one answer. The first thing is grow native plants in your gardens to get birds and bees and butterflies and small mammals. It's very important for them to find refuge in the city. And in the UK, you have this concept of having a single hedgerow going over hundreds of kilometers. Like you grow this particular plant over hundreds of kilometers so that there can be habitat for wildlife. The second thing is whatever is near you, whether it's a wetland or a forest, see if you can do something to save it. And there are citizen movements, as I said, everywhere now. In Gurgaon, there is Aravali Bachao. In Delhi, there were many movements to try to save the Delhi Ridge. Some of it worked, some of it didn't. Even now, we are involved in the regional plan for the entire NCR. We are trying to work with or against the government, whatever the case is, to make it a better plan, because the new plan doesn't have Aravali's in it. It doesn't have natural zones in it. It just has buildings and construction. And the third thing is, together we are stronger. So there have been movements that did not work, like in RA in Bombay, people like normal people, chartered accountants, teachers, professors, everybody's going to save this little forest because it means something to them. Because they used to go for walks there. There aren't enough green spaces in Bombay. It didn't work, but even if it doesn't work, it builds community. And I think community is really important. We need to know that there are others like us who might care for a tree or a plant or an animal. And I think that's important. I think building community itself is a very important way to one day counter the forces that be.
And how many of us realize that actually we are one contiguous natural system, which means that I just read in the Guardian newspaper that 800 million trees have been cut in the Amazon in Brazil to feed the demand for beef, right? And how many of us realize that the trees cut halfway across the world in the Amazon can actually have an effect on the climate in India? Right, because I was watching a David Attenborough documentary a couple of years back, and it started with how the sand that rises in the Sahara, how it affects the currents in the Atlantic and the life there, and how it feeds the Arctic, and how it comes back to South America and then back towards Asia, right? So,
yeah. I mean, of course, we're all connected. There's this weather phenomenon known as El Nino, and when it comes, so many countries get affected. Because of climate change, there's been a lot of rain in Africa. And because of the rain in Africa, there have been these huge swarms of locusts. Those huge swarms of locusts have come to Pakistan, India, the Indian subcontinent, and eaten everything. And it's like it was in the Bible. It's like a plague of locusts, because when they come in those numbers, they finish everything. So rainfall in Africa impacting crops in Rajasthan and Gujarat, where the locusts came. Now, because there's a warning system, people were prepared in India, but just to say, something that's so far away impacting us here, it doesn't seem like it will happen, but it does happen. And climate change is all about crazy things happening. And it's because of climate change that it's raining at this weird time, and these locusts are breeding more and more. And mosquitoes are moving up. So mosquitoes are now in the temperate zones. Dengue has gone to United Kingdom, for example. So I mean, this is a sad story that I'm telling, but I'm also trying to say that the more we realize we're connected, the more we can actually answer the problem. That we have to be united in making sure that nature becomes an urgent priority.
I totally agree with you, and I think many of us in the audience may want to ask some questions. Let's make it more interactive. So, yeah.
Hello, my name is Vinayak. Not a question, but a sort of a general sort of thoughts which I like to share. So would totally relate the sort of, so I come from a place called Hisar in Haryana, absolutely in the, heartland of Haryana. And I guess the moment sort of, ever since I was born, my association with nature started. Because Hisar is actually known for a agriculture university. And luckily my parents were professors of agriculture in the same university. So could totally relate the sort of, experience or the sort of existence of nature which we have seen in our childhood, and it's nowhere close to what we are seeing. Just to give an example, so our school used to be in the absolutely, in the middle of a forest, I would say. And we used to go on cycles. And there used to be huge vultures all the way sitting on the top, perched absolutely on the top of the trees. And we used to feel really scared, passing under the trees. And now, I mean, vultures are gone, for example. Similarly, talking about kitchen gardens, I clearly remember in the morning, of course, our mother used to say, eat local and everything. So every morning we used to pluck a mooli or a gobi and make the parantha, and, nowhere it's being to seen. But yes, I mean, that's the harsh reality, let's say. So, of course, on, let's say, but there is definitely some hope. So, of course, citizens are getting sort of more sensitized. So, myself being a resident of Gurgaon now and father of a 6-year-old one, I can totally say that kids also, I mean, they are absolutely sensitized. Getting sensitized about, let's say, waste segregation, protecting, let's say, plants, growing their food, so growing even a tomato or a mango or things like that. And also sort of towards bird watching as well. There's a huge community, and I myself am a bird watcher. So, and I keep taking kids from the school, just for, let's say, nature walks and bird walks. So, I mean, on my end, I can say that at least sort of, I must have touched about 50, 60 kids, sort of trying to sensitize them and their parents that let's start small from our homes, at least by reducing plastic, for example. So all the birthday parties, what's happening, let's reduce, let's not cause more plastic and things like that. So yes, it's a journey, and I mean, hopefully, yes, the coming generation is for sure. I feel they are getting much more sensitized through schools and communities and stuff like that. Thank you.
I agree with you. Bird watching has really come up, and I think kids today are definitely more aware, for sure, than a few generations ago.
So my name is Parul. I'm one of the few blessed ones, I think, who spent a lot of my young days in the forest, literally. I was telling Neha, I've stayed amongst tigers and elephants and pythons, literally. Snakes hanging from the trees. I never felt scared, and not one single person was ever harmed. We had in a drill, the big incident, I forgot to tell you, there was one of the hugest pythons they found, and it just curled itself above a pillar. And people inside, instead of harming it, which they could have done and killed it, people, good about 25 people, including my father, were inside that place, and they stayed there for 7 days on water and basic necessities. But till that python curled itself away and they helped move it, nobody killed it. I feel very proud of it. So lots of stories about that. But I stay in Gurgaon and I have an independent house. And I realized we had a backyard where there were lots of trees, and we had about 25 species of birds and peacocks coming. Everything vanished. But I have a backyard. I chose to not concretize it. I have few lemon trees. I have a chiku tree. I have a mango tree. Thousands of lemons. Then I have, thanks to that, I have monkeys and all kinds of birds, and I can wake up 6 o'clock in the morning thanks to that noise and not something else. And my house, I actually measured the temperature thanks to those trees, and lots of, like you said, native plants in the front yard, and not just ornamental plants and flowers. My house is literally 2 to 3 degrees cooler than every other house on that lane. A lot of people will know the area around Bata area in Gurgaon. And my house is 2 degrees cooler than every other house. And I still have, during the season, peacocks coming, sitting near my tank. I let it overflow so that just the peacocks come and the birds come. Sparrows, we have put up those small houses, wooden, that they make for sparrows, they come. So lots of, that's a small bit I can do on my behalf, and I think everybody who has some space can attract a lot of nature in their own capacity. No effort is too small. And yes, like he said, sensitizing children is the first step in our lives.
Thank you so much. Yeah, and I just hope that people who did not grow around nature can still appreciate it. Because a lot of people and a lot of readers say that they grew up amongst nature and that's why they love nature. But I hope that kids who grew up in the city can also love nature.
Yeah, I missed my jamun tree at home. And yeah, I think there's a lady at the back. Then we'll come back to you. Oh, okay, sorry. Okay, yeah, okay, the gentleman.
Hi, my name is Rahul Kapoor. My question to you, Neha, is to your observation. Are the animals and birds we have in India, over the last 5 years, are they safer?
Some definitely are safer. I think the tiger is safer. The tiger is doing well. The elephant is also doing all right. So we have about 30,000 elephants. We have a lot of leopards as well. But some animals, the ones that are the specialists, the ones that will only live in a particular place, such as the great Indian bustard, it's a large bird of the desert ecosystem. So these specialists are not doing well at all. But the generalists, the one that can move around, the one that can inhabit larger ecosystems are doing better. And India, in its global commitments, in its global speeches, talks about the tiger. We have 80% of the world's wild tigers, and we're very proud of that. It's today part of our foreign policy almost. So the answer is mixed. So I think the future with climate change and with other kinds of pressure on animals, it's always going to be the specialists that will be the most endangered. And therefore, we need to work more for those specialists.
So it would be fair to say that in the sanctuaries, in the forests, perhaps the animals are protected, but in the open areas, perhaps, including the rivers, etc.,
Yeah.
perhaps they're not
Yeah.
quite as protected.
Yeah. That is definitely one way to put it. And animals also don't know borders, so they keep moving. So there is a protected area for great Indian bustards, for example. It's called the Desert National Park.
But it's large open area, which is
And they keep
not really
moving.
protected. Yeah.
And they keep moving outside the national park because they need to move large distances. So strongly migratory animals don't stay inside protected areas. So that's another issue. We eventually have to have gentle forms of land use over larger areas, which can allow animals to pass through them.
I think we'll allow another one here first.
Okay, so first thing I would just want to mention that one of the best examples of a native forest, an ecological restoration project is right here in Gurgaon, the Aravali Biodiversity Park. It's my happy place. It gives me, again, a high. So if people haven't gone there, it's free. It's right here. I didn't develop it, but once again, it's my happy place. It gives me a high every time I go there. So Neha, I want to ask you, I have a huge problem with when you say Save the Tiger and this Project Tiger, they keep fencing these reserves and saying, okay, this is where the animals are and the humans are out. All the one Gujars have been thrown out. I have a huge problem with that because man has lived millions of years, coexisted millions of years with, flora and fauna. And now you're trying to draw these boundaries and say, animals stay there and humans stay here. What do you feel about that?
It depends on the landscape. So in East India, there's a lot of hunting. So there isn't any happy coexistence. And in East India, the tiger reserves aren't doing well. Some of these tiger photos, this one actually, is by my friend from Orissa, Aditya Panda. And everything gets hunted in those reserves, in Simlipal, in Satkosia, in Chhattisgarh, in Jharkhand. So you may have an area looking green, but it may not have a good relationship with wildlife. On the other hand, there are many reserves where people live happily along with people, so along with animals. So it isn't a single thing, but I definitely believe that we have to take people along. There's no question of like forcibly evicting people or, making fences, etc. I think it's also a little complicated because if you have a village, they definitely want X number of things there. And we have to then decide how much scale of that should go inside the forest. Can you have a hospital there? Can you have a school? Can you have shopping facilities inside the tiger reserve or any other place? So obviously when people are living, they do want facilities, they need it. And a lot of communities that live in the forest need medical facilities that have to be way better than what they get. A lot of women die in childbirth, for example. My thesis was in Saraska Tiger Reserve, and there itself a lot of women had died, even though it's not so far away from the main road. There are tiger reserves that are way bigger than Saraska, much more remote. Just to say that if there are people, there has to be infrastructure of some kind, access and infrastructure both. and people are also not the same. I'm completely against forcing people to do anything. I think it takes time to make a dialogue, but it has to be done like that. At the same time, the scale of development inside the forest also has to be looked at. It can't be the same scale as Gurgaon city or Delhi city. So I worked on the Amur Falcon project, which is there in this book. That was completely the community deciding to be conservationists. And it was 10 years of work and 10 years of talking. And like I said, people have aspirations. An entire village of 100 people does not speak in one voice. There'll be one guy who wants something different, 10 people who want something else. So it's a difficult negotiation. But obviously it can only happen if there's some form of consensus. Even if everybody doesn't agree, there has to be some broad agreement. So I think modern conservation has to account for people's aspirations. At the same time, it must account for how we are changing the land use of that area.
It's interesting you say that because the forest department in Uttarakhand treats me very differently because I'm an environmentalist than a lot of my friends who are around there who are Nawabs and Royals and have a history of hunting. In fact, it's sad that most of the people who own lands in the buffer zones are all the old Nawabs and Thakurs who bought those lands for hunting purposes. Anyway, my last question, has anybody collected data on, the insects come from the agricultural fields that have pesticide and chemicals, and they get eaten by the birds and they get eaten by the mammals. Has anybody done any research on the kind of chemical and pesticide infestation like deep into our forests? I mean, this subject really interests me, and I don't find any data points on it.
There are studies on toxicology on animals. A lot of animals are dying because there's so much toxin inside their body. So even Sarus cranes are dying. Peacocks are dying. Peacocks die. Either they're eating the pesticide or they're eating an insect which has died of the pesticide. Great Indian bustards as well. There are 100 left on Earth, and few of them are still dying of poisoning. So, I mean, it's the ones that eat other animals that are the most at risk. And raptors, all raptors are doing really badly. So eagles, yes, eagles, vultures, kites, buzzards, they're all doing badly because they eat other animals that have the residue in them and it keeps accumulating in their body. And of course, it's bad for us as well, right? Like, we cannot just keep having pesticides and insecticides and all these chemicals. That's why there's a cancer train that runs from Punjab, because there's just too much chemical load in the soil, yeah. It's an Erin Brockovich waiting to happen everywhere.
In case you haven't noticed, Neha's books are available here. So please pick them up on the way out or while you're still here, and Neha will happily sign them, right?
Yes, I'm happy to sign.
Yeah, so I don't know how much time we have, Anup. So, okay.
One last question. All right, thank you. I'm Shashank. Thank you so much. It's so nice. And this question's for both our girls and me. We've noticed whenever you have pigeons, the mynas and the sparrows have vanished. Is it true that the pigeons are very invasive and you should avoid feeding them and just kind of let them be? And
Yeah, it's true. So, pigeons actually, the pigeons that you see in the city, it's called blue rock pigeon. It's probably a descendant of a tame pigeon, and it's not fully a wild animal, and that's why they're not scared of us. And because they're not scared of us, they're also very bold with other birds, and they keep displacing all the other birds. And because we're feeding them that much, at the scale that we're feeding them, their numbers have really gone up unsustainably. So, if any one animal goes up in such huge numbers, it can't be good for the other animals. So house sparrows have also been displaced by pigeons. We should not be feeding any wild animals, not just pigeons, because normally even the food we give them is not right for them. In nature, they look for a little bit of this, little bit of that, like an elephant will eat grain, it will eat leaves, it will eat flowers. So if you're feeding it just one kind of thing, it's probably going to become obese. There are never any fat animals in nature. The fat animals are always in the zoos or, the ones that are pets. But in nature, you don't see obese animals. So we shouldn't be feeding any wild animal. Also, we change the behavior of the animal if we feed it. So in Nilgiris, for example, these lion-tailed macaques, which are only found in that place, come to your car and beg for food. We've made beggars out of these beautiful monkeys, and even my dog is not allowed to beg me for food. He has a fixed eating time. So we shouldn't be feeding wild animals at all. It's a strict no-no. We can grow the plants for them that they can eat themselves in the garden, but to put out food, it's a bad idea.
So everyone in this room who's motivated to do their bit for a natural world, let's call them nature soldiers. Are there generals out there whose armies they can join?
I think just find your local bird watchers and go out in nature first and just experience nature. I think it's a wonderful thing for our mental health. It's full of surprises. You never know what you'll find. The migratory birds that come to Delhi and Haryana and NCR. Find your local bird watcher and go on a walk. And you are going to become that general. You don't have to look at anybody else. People go for walks and their life changes. You know, people go, they start noticing birds and their life changes. Because there's something to do that's beyond your Excel sheet and beyond your other worries in life.
I think, I don't know about all of you, but I'm more enlightened than I was a few hours ago. Thank you so much, Neha. And thanks you for being such an attentive audience and being such a interested audience. And I think for me personally, this environmental degradation and climate change is the most pressing issue that the human race has to address, more than politics and borders and the economy and our GDPs and everything else, because if we don't take care of a natural world, right, like I coined this some time back, right, for our concrete world to survive, our natural world has to thrive.
Absolutely. There's no economy without ecology at all. Like I said, we can't pollinate our crops ourselves. We need nature.
Yeah, so
I completely agree.
So we have economists and we need economists.
Yes, yes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.